The ANA framework is the first part of the approach criterion. It includes the long-term community goal, current community condition, project goal, objectives, outputs, and outcomes and indicators. The ANA framework is intended to outline your project in a way that focuses on achievable and measurable project outcomes that lead to a long-term community goal. We will be going over each section to help you understand what is expected.
Okay, the first element, if you look into your FOA, please go to the review criterion in section 5.1, and these sections under approach are numbered, and the numbered elements, they're called elements now. It's kind of a new term that we haven't really used in A&E, but each one is an element and they're numbered. And so the numbers differ between program areas. So native language has more elements under it, so the numbers will be different for each FOA. So we will do our best to make sure you know where we're at when we refer to them, but keep in mind that the numbers will be different. But for now, the first one for all of them is the long-term community goal. And whenever we're talking about an element in the review criterion, it has this format. So it'll be the brown box and the little square bullet. And then this, the text is word for word from the FOA, and then we'll usually paraphrase it for you in everyday English. Okay, so the long-term community goal. ANA wants to ensure that they are supporting projects that will lead to long-term community goals and have a lasting impact. So the application starts with identifying a long-term community goal identified through a community process, such as surveys, meetings, and strategic plans. So you'll notice that the FOA criteria wants you to identify your long-term community goal and then explain how the proposed project was selected to address it.
All right. The long-term community goals should be a brief and lofty statement. It should capture the ideal situation you want your community to be in. An easy example would be all tribal members are to be fluent in our native language. That statement is brief and it is ideal. In addition to identifying your long-term community goal, you will also need to describe how the long-term community goal was determined and what role did your community play in that decision. For instance, did your tribe or organization conduct a survey or hold a community meeting? What were the results of the community's participation? After you've explained that, you want to then explain how your proposed project was chosen as your community's best option to move toward your long-term community goals. So you just want to make sure your long-term community goal is an idea situation you want your community to be in. And the next section is the current community condition, which is worth a maximum of 3 points and starts on page 27 of the training manual. The current community condition should include a description of one condition the project will address as it relates to the purpose of the FOA. The narrative should identify and provide baseline information on the target population that is impacted by this condition. Target population meaning your students, who are you serving? There should also be a description of how the baseline information can be used to show a change in the condition identified in the application. And you want to make sure the baseline information relates to the condition. For example, if the current community condition relates to high unemployment, the baseline information should provide data related to unemployment rates, not rates of diabetes or heart conditions in the community. You want the baseline information to relate to the condition of your community. The last bullet point on the screen is specific for the language applications, both PNM and EMI, and it relates to the current status of the language. But we'll get more into this on a later slide.
Okay, so current community condition. For those of you that have been with ANA for a while, this used to be the problem statement. So the terminology has changed, but it's basically the same thing. The current community condition can be defined as the specific and current barrier that is preventing a community from achieving its long-term community goal. So remember, we already identified our long-term community goal, and this project is the barrier that's keeping us from that. And it's one specific condition that can be addressed by the project. So remember, you have typically 3 years to address the project, and 5 on Esther Martinez, but you want to make sure that the condition that you're addressing can be addressed, can be reduced, can be eliminated within that 3-year time frame. So what I usually suggest is, say you're trying to reduce unemployment in your community. That's very broad, and countries have trouble reducing unemployment. It's kind of a topical subject right now, but to make a dent under normal circumstances, to make a dent in unemployment, it's helpful to go to a target. So your community input would help you prioritize which segment of your population would most benefit from this. So say you determine that single parents are the ones that are most affected by unemployment, and you can take that segment and train them, and then you can address your unemployment problem. Okay, so now you're going to make sure that the data, you're going to need to provide some data that supports this need. So you want to make sure that it's local, it's drawn from your own community or your partners. So there's going to be some research involved with that, and hopefully you've done all the planning before this, but you're going to have to draw some data on your project that supports your condition. So if your problem is unemployment in your community, you're going to get the data for local rates. Please don't use like nationwide data. I remember back in the day, BIA had something on their website about Native Americans have a 50% unemployment rate, and people used to cite that in their applications. But that's, we're all in different situations in our communities. That's not really applicable. So you need to find data that's from your community and very recent. You want to make sure that the data is not more than 3 to 5 years. 3 years is getting kind of outdated. 5 years is getting more outdated. You want to be as up to date as possible. The other thing that we want you to do is avoid the lack of or the need for your current community condition. So you want to avoid we need a youth center in our community. So as you notice, it has the need in there. But if you think about it, when you're stating your current community condition like that, you're not presenting your current condition. You're actually providing the solution. You're saying we need a youth center. That's the solution to what problem? So your problems may be that you have unsupervised latchkey children. You have, their grades are declining, they're not graduating from high school, or those types of things. That is your current community condition. And that's what you need to include in this section. So in addition, a few other tips to providing your current community condition. You want to make sure that it's brief and to the point. So 1 sentence, 2 sentences max. It's got to be very brief. We don't want we've been seeing in some applications where under the current community condition, people write, pages and pages. It is supposed to be just the one brief statement. We suggest formatting. You can highlight it, you can bold it, you can put it in a box. It lets you and both the reviewer know that this is our condition that we have and it's what this project will be addressing. So as for wording the current community condition, I'd like you to be compelling, urgent, without being tabloidy, if that's not a very good word, but I hope you know what I mean. By that I mean, by reading your current community condition, I should want to act on it, or I see your situation. It's really compelling me to help you. Yeah. Okay, for an example, a lot of situations in our communities is the low fluency rates. So some people are down to like single digit numbers of their fluent speakers in their community. So their current community condition would be, out of a community of 5,000 people, we have 6 elders that are fluent in the language. We only have 6 elders that are fluent in our language. By just saying that, it's urgent and it's compelling. I really feel the need to help you get some kind of project up and up so you can get that fluency up, and it's not tabloidy because it's very based on your language, the status of your language that you're going to provide later. So keep those things in mind. And then you'll notice when I gave the example, I included baseline in the current community condition, and it's really helpful. I said that out of a community of 5,000 people, we have, I forget what I said, 5 fluent elders. So what I did there was, some people might say out of our community, we have a 1% that's fluent in our language, which is fine as long as you include what the baseline is. So is it 1% of 200? Is it 1% of 5,000? Is it 1% of 15,000? You really need to provide that information because it makes it more compelling. So providing that information makes a really good community condition.
And speaking of language projects, if you are planning to apply for a PNM or EMI award, keep in mind the language applications have an additional element under the current community condition. This additional element describes the current status of the native language. The status of the language needs to be described within the past 5 years. So in this description, you want to include the demographics and fluency rates, such as how many enrolled members are there, how many are fluent, first language speakers versus emerging second language speakers, like Dawn was using in her example. You want to include available language resources and any current language programs that exist. If you do have existing programs, what are the participation rates? If there are no language programs in your community, what is the desire of the community to participate in a language program? This type of information is what should be addressed under this additional element for the language applications. And our next sub-criterion is the project goal. This is the third sub-criterion of the approach criteria, and it is worth a maximum of 3 points. And you can find the details for the project goal starting on page 33 of the training manual. The project goal is a statement describing what is to be achieved by the project's implementation and or what role the project will play in addressing the current community condition. The application also needs to describe, in addition to the actual project goal, needs to describe how the project goal relates to the program purpose of the FOA, which can be found on the first 2 to 3 pages of the FOA. Make sure it's the FOA that the program area that you're applying for. The applicant should relate their project to one of the 3 program concepts described in that section. And again, that section is in the FOA on the first 2 to 3 pages.
So let's get into project goal. Project goal, again, like the current community condition, is a brief statement identifying what will be accomplished by this project. So it's not a paragraph or anything. It can be just one brief statement. You're going to be using it, and in all of these, you're going to, once you've decided on the final wording, you're going to need to be consistent and use it throughout the entire application. And it's, there can be points deducted if things aren't consistent. So we'll get into more of that later. All right, so you're going to have a brief project goal. You're going to explain how your project will reduce or eliminate the negative condition, and you're going to make sure that it's logically connected to both the long-term community goal and the current community condition.
All right, now we're going to get into objectives. The objective subcriterion is worth a maximum of 6 points and can be found on page 37 of the training manual. Objectives are the building blocks of your application that need to be achieved to reach the project goal and improve the current community condition. You are allowed a maximum of 3 project objectives for the entire project period. The format for ANA's objectives is TTIP, which stands for timeline, target, indicator, and population. And Dawn will go more into detail on this on the next slide.
Okay, here it is, the TTIP format for objectives. Okay, as Kwani mentioned, T stands for time bound, and then target, indicator, and population. So time bound is defined as the time by which the objective will be achieved. This is the usual by the end of the first year, by the end of the second year, by the end of the project. As long as you include that little phrase, you have complied with the time-bound component. The next one is the target, and that is defined as the measurement for the intended amount of change. And then I'm going to go right into indicator because these two are tied together. The indicator is the measurable sign that something has been changed or achieved. So what I mean by the two of them are tied together is the indicator is going to tell you what is changing, and the target will tell you by how much. And the last component is population. So you're going to identify the specific group that the project will focus on. Okay, so by the end of, I mentioned that the target and the indicator are tied together. A well-crafted objective statement will tell the reviewer how much of what is changing, by when, and for whom. Okay, so for those of us, I'm sorry, I keep referring back to the good old days for us reviewers back, but before, when we had SMART objectives, the change from SMART to TTIP, which has been around for I think 3 years now, that was very hard on us. I literally felt like I was rewiring my brain, but the way to make it easier was using this Mad Lib approach. It really helps to make sure that you get all the components in an easy to do format, and it's basically it's quick and dirty. Okay, so for the first one, we're going to go by, insert the timeline. So by the end of year 1, by the end of the project, who, our tribe, fill in the blank tribe here, will increase. I threw in increase or decrease because those are the most common, but you can wordsmith them later to suit your purpose. Will increase the financial capacity of our finance department. And that's what is changing, that we're increasing the capacity of our financial department. And the last one is by how much. So we're going to increase it by 50%. Okay, so again, you note that the target and the indicator are tied together. If you ask yourself what is changing, you're increasing capacity, the target will answer by how much, by 50%. Okay, so this is the thing about TTIP. When you're writing your objective, I think we'll get into that in the next slide, actually. Okay, so yeah, we'll get into that in the next slide. So for now, I will get into some tips for TTIP. Is that if you're having to find yourself having to write a list of the things that are changing, you're only required to provide one of each component. So if you find yourself writing a list of things you're changing, you're going to have to change that. I suggest you could, like here's the suggestion. Our tribe will plan, develop, and pilot a language curriculum. So what I suggest you do is either wordsmith it to consolidate that all together. So you can change it to our tribe will implement a newly developed language curriculum, or you can consider splitting the objective into two separate ones, or three, whatever applies to you. So it would then be the native language staff will develop new language curriculum by the end of year one. And the second objective would be our immersion school will pilot the new language curriculum by the end of year three. So I hope you're seeing that you're only providing one target, one indicator for each objective. Once you start adding multiple layers, it's time to wordsmith it and change it. Okay, so more on objectives. The number of objectives is specific to your project design. It is possible to have like one objective that spans the whole 3 years of your project. That is perfectly acceptable. It is also, but you have the option of going up to 3 objectives before, I know that's the limit that ANA has placed on it. You can only have 3 objectives. So you could have 3 objectives for every year of your project. That's fine. And then you have everything in between. It all depends on the design of your project. Some objectives will be, you might have like one objective in year one, your second objective year two, your third objective in year three. It's all up to the design of your project and very specific to that. As long as you're within the 3 objective limit, you're fine. Okay, so this is what I was alluding to earlier in the other slide. Explain target numbers and what you're measuring. So for elements 7 in SEDS, ERE, and 8 in P&M, remember the example I used, our tribe will increase our tribe will increase our financial capacity, the capacity of our finance department by 50%. What does the 50% mean? That's what everybody, when reviewing, and it needs some explanation. So what you're going to do for element 7 or 8 in the language is explain what you mean by 50%. What are you using as your baseline? What are you, how are you going to measure that? And what is the criterion you're going to do to measure that? How is that 50% going to be determined? And so you're going to explain that narratively, because by using that example that I did, you met all the criterion for a TTIP objective, but it doesn't have the meaning in it, and you have to explain that. So I hope that's very clear. Okay, so for explaining how your objectives are you're going to have to explain how your objectives are logically connected to reducing and eliminating the current community condition, and explaining how completing the objectives will achieve the project goal. This is very important because as trainers, we often see people having as an objective, we're going to hire staff. By simply hiring staff, you're not explaining, you can't readily see how that's going to achieve the project goal. What's important is, what that staff will be accomplishing and what the building block is that they're going to be doing to achieve that project goal and eliminating the current community condition.
Okay, so now we're moving on to outputs. The output subcriterion is worth a maximum of 4 points and can be found on page 45 and 46 of the training manual. The outputs are the benchmarks showing progression of the project's implementation. They are the products and the services that are directly tied to the accomplishments of your milestone activities. In this section, you are asked to identify the outputs, relate their significance to the project, and detail how they are achievable within the stated timeframes.
Okay, so outputs, the definition for an output is the tangible products or services that result in actions taken to achieve project objectives. The results that we're talking about can be seen on a project level, and outputs are they used to be or same thing as deliverables. So they're tangible products. They're developing of a manual, developing of a curriculum, um, producing our a communication plan, that type of thing. Those are tangible products, and what we're going to be doing while you're going to be addressing outputs in this element, you're going to be putting the outputs later on in the OWP, the Objective Work Plan. So this is one of those things that doesn't work linear. It's not linear. We're going to be circling back. So I guess what's important now is knowing what an output is, and then once you get to the OWP, you're going to circle back and complete this section. Okay, so this is the manual, page 45. There's a little chart that will help you. So once you've finished your objective work plan and you have all your outputs finalized, what you're going to do is come back to this chart, and this isn't required. This is just something the trainers have developed because we hope it'll help you address this criterion. You're going to include the objective. You're going to list all the outputs in those objectives. And if they repeat, you don't have to repeat them. You can just say them once. You're going to identify the significance to the project for each objective, and then the time frame from when you will accomplish it. So again, it's reliant on the objective work plan, and then you'll have to fill this in once that is completed.
Okay, so now we're coming up to the completing the ANA framework. Outcomes and indicators is the last section of the ANA framework. This section is worth a maximum of 6 points, and outcomes and indicators start on page 48 of the training manual. So for each objective, you are going to identify a primary outcome, explain how each outcome relates to that objective, and then identify the indicator and how it can be observed and measured. There is an additional element, again, in this section for all native language applications relating to predetermined outcomes, as you can see in the last bullet on the screen. And we'll go more into details about this this element for the language applications in a later slide.
Okay, outcomes. Outcomes are defined as the expected change that results from the achievement of the objectives. And this change can be seen on a community level. So a lot of people confuse outputs and outcomes. So if you think of outputs as being on a project level and outcomes are seen on a community level, that might help you. And ANA requires that you provide one primary outcome for each of your objectives. So and the outcome can be the same, say you have 3 objectives, you could have like 2 of the objectives have the same outcome. That's fine, but you have to identify it. So and also, while there may be multiple outcomes for each objective, ANA requires you only to provide the one. That's why it's called the primary outcome. These are things that you'll be tracking later, so you want to make sure that you only identify one. Okay, so outcomes. There's a specific requirement for language projects. So Esther Martinez, immersion and preservation and maintenance, ANA provided outcomes for you to use. So they're probably what you were going to use anyways. And you have the choice of picking one or more, but they are increasing language fluency, increasing language learning resources in your community, increasing certified language teachers, and increase capacity to implement language programs. So when you're writing your objectives for your language project, you're going to choose one of these outcomes for it. It's nice and easy. It's already chosen for you. And that is for, it's element 16 under P&M and EMI for your information. Okay, indicators. That is the next sub-criterion. Indicators. Where have we heard that before? We've heard that in the TTIP objectives, right? It's the I in TTIP. So what you're going to do is refer back to that I, and you're going to repeat it here. And just a reminder, it is what will change after achieving each objective. I don't know if you've noticed, but if you go through the elements of the outcome and indicator, they're very difficult to answer one by one. So what we did as trainers, we again drew you a little chart. Hopefully it'll make it easier to identify this. So you're going to include your objective, and then add the outcome, your primary outcome that you have chosen for that objective, and then add your indicator. So this puts it in a nice, neat package, and then from there you're going to have to identify and describe in your narrative how these are all logically connected. And you're going to have like one chart for each objective. So if you have only one objective, you're fine, and then you're going to do objective 2 and objective 3 if it's applicable. Okay, so some people, I mentioned before, some people find outcomes and outputs, they're kind of, all these components are probably swirling in your head. And so to provide some clarity between outcomes and outputs, the outcomes are the positive change as a result of completing an objective. And you're going to see this on a community level. So people are increasing their fluency, they're decreasing unemployment, they're better trained to get those jobs they need. This is the results we're seeing on a community level. And you're going to tie these outcomes to each objective. The outputs, on the other hand, are tangible. And so they're manuals, their curriculum. So they're tangible, and you see these results on the project level. So while you're racking up and completing and putting out and delivering all these outputs, we're going to see this on a project level, positive result as you're completing your project and you're demonstrating your benchmarks and progression through your project. So the outputs are going to be tied to each milestone activity, and this will become clearer once we get into the OWP later on.
Thank you for watching this video on the ANA framework. We hope this video has been helpful in understanding the ANA framework. If you have any questions about the framework or the ANA application process, our contact information is on the screen. Good luck with your application, and we look forward to reading them.